Hello everyone, I am Mrs. Fulton from the English department. Have you ever wondered what happens to old gods when they no longer have people to believe in them? All this power and immortality, what are they going to do with it? Well, today's Stanwell read-along is called Jam and Jerusalem, and it follows the adventure of two Welsh gods and an Irish one. I hope that you enjoy.
Jam and Jerusalem. Gwyn Apnod closed his eyes and took a deep breath before assessing the countryside below him. The village, sitting nestled in the rolling and rugged hills and dales, simply put, was gorgeous. Pretty grey cottages stood proudly along the few streets and lanes. A small tributary gurgled happily through the middle of the place. Children bent over the railings either side of it, laughing and shouting, pointing at something in the water. The lone roundabout, just beside the obligatory English pub, proudly displayed the sign, Smithelwick, Yorkshire in Bloom, winner 2018. The church on the hill, Norman in design, imposing and yet welcoming, cast its long shadow over the settlement, as if attempting to offer it protection. It was pretty much perfect. No wonder Yorkshiremen called it God's own country. "Funny place for him to end up," he grumbled. "It's quiet. Peaceful." A shadow fell across him and he shuddered. He didn't need to look up to know who was behind him. Only one person gave off that aura of pure dread, powerful enough to make even him shudder. "Hello, Aaron." "All right, Bat?" his cousin said. "How have you been?" Gwyn got to his feet, brushing dust off the business suit that was his attire now. He held out his hand. Aaron rolled his dark eyes before embracing Gwyn and lifting him off his feet. "A handshake. Is that how you greet your cousin after 100 years? Put me down. You'll crease my suit." Aaron practically dropped Gwyn, and he nearly stumbled over his own feet as he caught his balance. The brat hadn't changed. He cast his gaze over his cousin's attire. He was in jeans and combat boots and an oversized jumper, his long black hair tumbling over his shoulders. Hardly appropriate, but he had always been the same. In their heyday he had run into battle with nothing but his sword to keep him safe. Gwyn allowed himself a smile. Aaron was chaos after all. He took hold of his cousin's shoulder. "Hell's teeth, man. It is good to see you, even if your hair's too long. Don't be jealous just because you can't carry it off. You never had any style. Too stiff and formal. Even now, you'd have paid a fortune for that suit, but you can't really carry it off. You still wear your hair like a soldier. Brat. I look great. And you know it. You keeping well?" Aaron nodded. "Keeping busy. I've seen. You're having too much fun in Asia and the Middle East." "You're having fun stopping me, Mr. Corporate. At least it's honest work." Aaron blew a raspberry. "Ha! Let you show off how clever you are while stoking confrontation. Forever the strategist. So, why were you? Auntie didn't tell you." His cousin shrugged. "She said I needed to help you with something to do with Aid. Flippin' pikey. Always been more trouble than he's worth." "What's he done?" "Don't say pikey. I've no idea what Aid's done, but apparently it's shameful and he needs to be brought home, by whatever means necessary." His companion smiled broadly, showing off bright, clean teeth. It was unnerving, even for him. He didn't like it when Aaron smiled. There might be cousins and gods of war, but Gwyn had been a god of strategy. Aaron was one of chaos and revenge. He only smiled like that when a kill was on his mind. He was the threat, while Gwyn was reason, which is exactly why they've been sent together. Aid wouldn't stand a chance against Aaron in a straight fight. Neither would I. "Quite right, Egg. Where's he to?" Aaron said, his eyes glinting in excitement. Gwyn nodded towards the village below. "Down there. Auntie gave me the address. It's on the main street." "Tidy." They made their way down the dale towards the chocolate box village. The pretty scene Gwyn had watched from the hilltop continued to unfold. It was a fine day for May, so fine that there were people sunbathing on the village green while the children paddled in the little stream. Aaron sniffed the air and made a face. Ugh, the people are good here. There's a little pride and gluttony, but on the whole they are good. There's not even an alcoholic or a wife-beater here. Gwyn frowned. When a god of war and the underworld came to the mortal realm, pollution and corruption followed. It was the way of their kind. Their quarry had done no such thing. No wonder Aid's stepmother had ordered that he be retrieved. He stopped to check the address on his phone and looked up and down the high street, looking for the place. His eyes settled on a pristine white building with green shutters and awning, hanging baskets bursting with pink and purple flowers hung on either side of the green door, swinging gently in a soft breeze. Display stands glistened in the windows, and Gwyn realised with a rush of anger exactly what the shop was. "Acha vi," he snapped. "A cafe. He's a prince of the underworld, and he's running a cafe. I wonder if he does bar a breath." Aaron muttered. "We're in Yorkshire, man, not the valleys. Of course he won't do bar a breath. It'll be a tea cake or bram brack, given he's Irish." Aaron made a face. "That's not the same. I really want some bar a breath now. Can we go via home on the way back?" Gwyn resisted the urge to groan. Aaron was impulsive and violent by nature. He needed to keep him on side. "I suppose it won't hurt. Right, shall we get him? I like the name. It's funny." He took one look at the sign and tutted. "It's childish." Gwyn's eyes settled on the reflection in the sparkling shop window. To all the world, he and Aaron just looked like two tall, dark-haired men, so alike they could be brothers. Nothing about them suggested that they were more than human. He set his shoulders and led Aaron into Dan's tea house. Aidan put the last of the fresh scones on the glass cake stand before carefully lowering the cloche. He allowed himself a little smile as he looked out over his cafe. This was a rare moment of calm. The morning crowd, the commuters, the mummies hanging out after whatever baby class they'd been attending, and the old men who came to read their papers in his huge armchairs, had gone, and the Elevenses crowd would soon be here before the lunch rush began. He sighed happily. He adored the routine of his little cafe. He ran his hand over the handmade oak countertop. He had been, initially, a little worried when he'd opened up that overstuffed armchairs and shabby chic white furniture had had its day, even in a small place like Smithlewick. But it was perfect. He'd been brave and gone for white walls, despite openly inviting families with the tiny play corner stuffed full of toys and books and child-sized tables. He kept the family feel in the rest of the place as well, installing underfloor heating under the oak floorboards, which he waxed and polished every day, comfortable chairs around every table with their blue gingham tablecloths, and a few comfy armchairs by the fireplace. On really cold days, he turned on the gas fire and draped blankets over the chairs for the old men who came in to read their newspapers. It was a haven here. The bell tinkled, interrupting his daydream, and Aidan felt himself grinning. 11:05, right on time. "Morning, Aidan!" Mrs. Harding crooned, adjusting her floral twin set as she waddled up to the counter. "Morning, Mrs. H." He practically purred as her sharp eyes settled on the display case, which was built into the counter. "What'll it be? Carrot cake? Lemon drizzle? Praline eclair?" The little old lady wiped her mouth and licked her lips, her pudgy little fingers waggling in the air. "It's all so tempting. I really shouldn't be naughty." "I am a firm believer that a little bit of naughtiness is good for you." He winked at her and she dissolved into embarrassed, girlish giggles. "Oh, stop it, you! I'm old enough to be your granny. I'll have the eclair and a pot of tea. How are things going with our young Reverend Kate? I saw the two of you stepping out last week." He smiled politely. "A gentleman doesn't tell. After a kiss, Mrs. H. Especially not to the biggest gossip in the county. You and the other biddies will have planned the wedding by tea time." The old lady tutted as she took her seat. The bell tinkled again, and the aforementioned Kate, dressed in black with a slip of white at her throat, stepped into his shop. "Morning, Vicar," Aidan called, as the frazzled young woman with mounds of curly red hair strode purposefully towards him. "Aidan, I need help. The new bishop is coming for dinner, and he loves sticky toffee pudding. I have no idea how to do it, and I'm not giving my new boss store-bought pudding." "I'll do you one better," Aidan said. "I'll make you a batch." Kate pulled at her collar. "That's cheating, Aidan." He shrugged and took her hand. "You've got a busy parish for all its size. Besides, isn't it the least a man can do for the woman he's interested in?" Kate blushed while Mrs. Harding made cooing sounds at them. He allowed himself a little smile. He really liked Kate. A cold shiver danced down his spine, and his attention snapped away from the cute vicar, and he glared out of the window. Every inch of his skin erupted into goose pimples. 2 tall, dark men were staring into the shop. Strangers in the village, but he knew who they were. "Kate," he said, his voice thick, "get Mrs. Harding out of here. Take her through the kitchen. Trouble's coming." She frowned at him, but before she could question him, the people opened the door and came in. Despite their human appearance, Aidan could see in their shadows what they really were. Arawn and Gwynebnodd, gods of war and hell, just like him. Their shadows stretched out on the wall, revealing their true selves. Mantles floated behind them, moved by some invisible breeze. The shadow of Gwyn's hand rested on his sword, though the man in front of him kept his hands loose. The other shadow kept shifting from one foot to the other, as if it couldn't keep still. Arawn was ready for a fight. The shadows continued to grow over the freshly painted walls, tarnishing his piece of heaven just by their presence. His old life was a stain on the world, a stain he tried to erase by doing something that made people happy. Aidan put his hands on the countertop to stop them from shaking. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. How dare she? How dare she send Arawn after him? There were others she could have sent with Gwyn. But Arawn? He'd go out of his way to hurt someone. Not while he drew breath. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "How can I help you?" "Cousin," Gwyn said coldly, his black eyes hard. "Let us not play this game. We've been sent to fetch you home." Aidan folded his arms and glared at his cousin. Growing up, the 3 of them were as close as brothers and looked so similar that people often mistook them for siblings, until he spoke and they heard his accent. "Get lost. I'm not going home. I like it here." Gwyn's mouth set in a hard line. "Come on, man. What on earth are you doing in a bakery? It's ridiculous. You're one of us. Do you remember what we used to do, the 3 of us, before the Christians drove us out? We were gods of war and hell. We rampaged across these isles, crushing anyone who dared stand against us. Now look at you." He made a face as he gestured at Aidan. "You're wearing an apron, but no wonder your mother wants you home." "She's not my mother," Aidan said coldly. Gwyn and Arawn shared a look, and Arawn smirked. Gwyn leant over the counter, and Aidan leaned back on instinct. "Is this about the swan thing?" Aidan grit his teeth. Ever since they were children, Gwyn and Arawn had taken the hand out of him for being turned into a swan by his stepmother. For goodness sake, the children of Lear had done other things. "It's not about the swan thing." "If it's any consolation," Arawn said, grinning, "you were a very pretty swan." "Not helping, Arawn," Gwyn said. This is done. I know it, and so do you. Come quietly." His gaze turned toward the vicar and Mrs. Harding. "Or we will be forced to take action." His eyes narrowed as he recognized the collar Kate wore. He spat, and the tile on the ground sizzled. Arawn left his companion's side and wandered over to the period dresser Aidan had spent hours finishing until it was perfectly shabby chic. He'd spent months finding delicate blue china crockery to display in it. He picked up an exquisite saucer and inspected it. "Fraternizing with Christians, cousin," he tutted. "That will never do." He drew his nail around the edge of the crockery, making it squeal. He held it up in the light. A sharp edge glinted in the morning light. "These people are innocent," Aidan snapped. Aaron laughed. "What care I for innocence or guilt? There are always casualties in war." With an effortless, careless flick of his wrist, he threw the plate towards Kate's feet. On reflex, she moved back from the weaponized crockery, which embedded itself in the wood. She looked up at Aidan, her brown eyes suddenly very large in her pale face, her brows furrowed in question at him. She was holding on to Mrs. Harding, who'd gone as pale as the cream in her eclair. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to see this me." Aaron wandered back over to his cousin, smirking. Aidan tried to get his breathing under control. He had to think. There were innocents here. It was part of Gwyn's strategy. He was using Aaron as a threat against his friends. In the old day, he wouldn't have cared. But these weren't the old days. What did he have on hand to buy the women some time to get out? His eyes fell on a cable. That would do. "Come on, Aid. This isn't who you are," Gwyn tried. I'd almost forgotten this feeling. The anticipation of the fight. The iron tang of blood not yet spilled. "I wonder, do you remember what makes a good war?" Aidan murmured. Gwyn shrugged. "Strategy, chaos." "An opportunity," Aidan roared, snatching the cable beside him and swinging the microwave through the air. Gwyn couldn't move fast enough. The appliance smashed into the side of his head, forcing him to collide with Aaron, his momentum taking them both down. "Poppity ping!" Aidan yelled as he wielded the microwave like a mace. "Run!" he bellowed at the women. "Run before they get up!" They didn't need to be asked twice. Kate dragged Mrs. Harding across the floor towards the open door. She pushed the older woman into the street, but then hesitated to look back at Aidan. It was just a split second of hesitation, but it was enough. The door slammed shut. Aaron rose from the floor, literally rose like a ghost, his sword in one hand, his whip in the other. He'd shed the fashionably careless attire and stood in his true skin, a warlord dressed in fur and iron, wild and powerful, his eyes burning in fury as black curved horns pushed out of his forehead. And he stood between Kate and safety. She whimpered and tried to take a step back, but she fell. Aaron smirked and raised his whip above his head. "Imps!" Aidan roared, making the lights shake. There was a moment of silence before a chattering wail filled the tea house. 13 dark shadows erupted from the kitchen. They clicked and clacked across the floor before standing in between Kate and the god in front of her. They were no more than 2 feet tall, but he still backed away from them, snarling. Imps were quick and vicious and almost impossible to predict. Each one of them was poised, ready for a fight, nails as sharp and as wicked as carving knives raised in the air. "Orders?" they demanded of Aidan. "Get him." Yowling like cats, the little creatures rushed Aaron. The interloper snarled and roared as the imp, swift as shadows, collided with him, pushing him back from the door. Sharp talons slashed at his face and clothes, while vicious little teeth sank into his flesh. Aidan leapt over the counter and pulled Kate to her feet, dragging her towards the door. There was a crack of thunder and a black whip lashed towards them. Aidan barely had time to yank Kate back before the whip collided with the wall, making it erupt in jagged shards of board and mortar. In his eagerness to get away from Aaron, he had forgotten about Gwyn. Aidan's head snapped towards Gwyn. His cousin was just as strong as Aaron and Aidan, but his gift lay in strategy, at seeing where the flaws were before the enemy knew he had them. It made him a better fighter. Gwyn's face was utterly impassive and Aidan's stomach dropped. Gwyn was assessing the situation, coming up with a plan to beat Aidan. He had seconds before Gwyn made an inescapable move. "Imps! Attack Gwyn ap Nudd!" he snapped as he lifted Kate over the counter and deposited her in the kitchen. "Aidan, what are those things?" she asked as he rifled through the cupboards. "Gods, nasty ones," he answered, frantically knocking things out of the way until he found the box of salt. "Stand by the sink." He placed a pitcher of water beside her and handed her a cup before thrusting the salt at her. "Create a circle around yourself," he ordered. "Do not cross it and do not break it. Salt circles are sacred. They purify. Nothing that means you harm can cross it. Bless the water in the jug and be ready to defend yourself with it." "I don't understand," Kate squeaked. He smiled sadly at her and bowed. "I am Aed, a god of war in the underworld. My stepmother wants me home." Kate stared for a moment before rapidly creating the circle of salt around herself. There was a piteous scream, one of his imps, and Aidan bounded into the dining room. Aran and Gwyn were winning the fight against them, as quick and strong as they were. Aran bellowed, throwing a lance of fire at the imps who still plagued him. As one, they dodged it, running backwards and to the left of him. Aidan whistled, and the imps ran to him, crouching beside their master, snarling and hissing. Gwyn rose from the floor, wiping blood from his face. An imp had taken his left eye and torn through his human skin. The rest of it simply melted away, and the true Gwyn ap Nudd stood before him. He wore ancient battle armour, which was completely devoid of scratches, but stained in the blood of thousands, testament to his prowess in battle. His long black hair flowed around him, while his horns, long and straight, like swords, seemed to grow. "Rithik and full," he snarled, as fluid metal engulfed his face and set in a helmet. Before he could answer him, Aran rushed him and lifted him up. Caught off guard, Aidan couldn't think how to react. His cousin was fast and strong. The brute hefted him up and into the dresser. He fell to the ground and just managed to roll out of the way before it came down on him. The sound of his precious crockery smashing to pieces filled the air. Aidan ground his teeth and got to his feet. He had had enough of this clown. As he rose, he threw away the mask of the handsome, dark-haired man he'd been for 5 years and let the god out. A large pair of white wings rose from behind his back, while long black hair floated around him. Like his cousins, he too had horns, ones that spiraled up and out, perfect for impaling one's foes. His fingers grew into long claws, as hard red armour covered his body. He turned and faced Aran. "You attacked my friends, hurt my imps, and broke my dishes. You're dead," he snarled, launching himself at the man. Just as he collided with Aran, Gwyn's whip lashed out at him, missing him by mere inches. Aidan and Aran tumbled to the ground, punching and biting. Aidan managed to get on top of Aran, and that gave him time to reach for a chair and bring it down on his opponent's head. "Gwyn, help!" Aran yelled. Gwyn leapt at Aidan, but he brought the chair around, smashing it into Gwyn's belly. The impact broke the chair and forced Gwyn backwards, sending him barrelling into the kitchen. Kate shrieked, and then the sound of sizzling flesh followed as Gwyn screamed in pain. He stumbled into the room and fell over, clutching his face as the metal of his helmet dripped away, and screaming. Aran roared in outrage and kicked up, throwing Aidan into the air. Aidan spun and landed on his feet. He pulled his arms forward, mumbling ancient words in a deep, rumbling basso that made the ground shake. Every single piece of furniture rose into the air, collecting in a sharp point. He threw his arms down, and it all came crashing down on his cousin, impaling him, pinning him to the floor. Aran yelled in fury while Gwyn's agonized scream continued as he thrashed on the floor. The face of his flesh was burning now. Holy water wouldn't have been enough to make the skin rise up in such angry, pus-filled blisters. He must have crossed Kate's circle of salt when Aidan had knocked him into the kitchen. Aidan stood above his cousins, his hands clenched into fists. He raised his left hand and extended a finger. Quickly he drew the symbol, the curve of the Irish dragon, the loops and circles of the unbreakable Celtic knot, and the ancient runes for his name that would open the way home. There was a soft sigh, and a portal of golden light simply shimmered into being. It was a door to a reality beyond the confines of the dimension in which he currently stood. He did not look too closely, in case someone grabbed him and pulled him in by force. He pulled his hand up through the air and drew the broken furniture out of Aran. He lifted his cousin up by the hair. The Welshman coughed and purple blood splattered all over his chin. "Sorry, cousin," Aidan said, genuinely contrite. "You're dead, man," Aran snarled. "I am going to." Aidan didn't let him finish. He threw Aran into the golden light of the portal before turning to Gwyn, who was clawing at his neck and chest. The quicker he got home, the better. Aidan lifted him, far more gently than he had Aran, and sort of pushed him through the portal before jumping away. "Poor show, Ave," he shouted through the portal. "Next time send me a challenge. And you owe me new dishes." He snapped his finger and the circle closed. With the threat gone, he closed his eyes and pushed his godly self away, folded the wings and the horns under his human mask. He rolled his shoulders, trying to dispel the pinching, itching discomfort that came with his disguise. "Kate," he called. "Kate, are you all right?" He made his way into the kitchen. Kate was kneeling in a circle of salt, surrounded by his imps, clutching her cross and praying fervently. "Kate," he asked softly, "you can stop. They're gone." Her eyes flew open. All the softness was gone, replaced by a coldness he had never seen in her. Her brown eyes blazed in rage. "Get back, demon!" The words hit him like a slap. "I am not a demon. Honestly, you Christians, so limited. Anything with horns or hooves you immediately think is a demon. Lucifer and his ilk don't look like my kind. They look like humans. It's why you find them so hard to resist." Kate narrowed her eyes at him. "So what are you, then?" He exhaled through his nose and rubbed his forehead. "I already told you. I'm a god. I am Ave of Air, one of the children of Lear." "Children of Lear," she repeated. "Why do I recognize that?" He felt a flush dance across his cheeks. "We were turned into swans. We did other things, but it seems to be the only thing anyone half remembers." She blinked at him a few times, her mouth working, but she made no sound. "That's a myth," she managed to whisper eventually. "That didn't happen. You aren't real. You can't be real. First of all, how very dare you? Just because someone has become a myth doesn't mean they aren't real." "But you said you're a god." He was tired, too tired to justify his existence. Carefully, making sure to avoid the circle of salt, he lowered himself to the ground. "I am, or was. People left me offerings, asked for my blessing in times of conflict. I have powers, and I can open doors to other dimensions. Ergo, I am a god." He looked up at Kate. She was pale and shaking. He lifted his hand and she flinched. He let his hand fall. She didn't want him to touch her, and so he wouldn't. They sat in silence for a while until Kate stopped kneeling and sat on the floor, hugging her knees. "God of War?" she asked, retired. "Why?" "Cake is better. Easier to fix if it all goes wrong. Makes people happy." "How did you get into baking? Seems a pretty odd thing to get into." Aidan smiled. "Gwen came back from Turkey with some baklava. It was like edible joy. I wanted to find that again and share it." "Sounds like a drug," he chuckled. "Sugar is addictive." She gave him a half smile and his heart lifted. She'd just had her world turned upside down, come face to face with ancient beings that her faith said didn't exist. Talking was good. It would help her deal with the shock. "Who were those men?" "My cousins. Other gods of war in charge of other aspects of warfare. Aran and Gwyn." "They're Welsh. I thought you were Irish." "I am. They're third cousins, really, but we were really close growing up. And of course we used to go to war together." She snorted. You didn't look all that close when you smashed the microwave into one of them. Why did you shout the Welsh from microwave? His face grew hot. Because I was funny, and there wasn't enough time to make jokes about sheep, leeks, mountains, or singing, or coal mines. It's not really the Welsh from microwave. It's just fun to say. Poppity ping, Kate sniggered. Poppity ping, she answered. He leaned in, grinning. Poppity ping, he whispered dramatically. It worked. Kate started to giggle. It was hysteria, mostly. He'd seen it more times than he liked to remember, soldiers laughing until they were sick after too much bloodshed, but luckily Kate just belly laughed for a while. Her giggle fit passed, and she closed her eyes, leaning back against a cupboard. I take it they aren't going to leave you alone. Aidan snorted. No. Gwyn might accept he's been beaten, but Aaron's all about revenge. He'll come after me again. What will he do? Aidan shrugged. If he catches me at the wrong moment, he'll beat me to a pulp. I'm good, but I can't beat either of them in a straight fight, especially not if Aaron's riled up. Don't worry, he added quickly, seeing her eyes widen. I'll leave before they're ready to come back. I'll even send an imp to tell them I've moved on from here, so you won't have to worry about the village. Kate's eyes snapped towards the little creatures who were lounging on the kitchen floor. She shuddered. He didn't blame her. Imps looked like spiky little scraps of shadow with bulging eyes and grinning sharp teeth. They'd never hurt her, though. Not unless he told them to. I still can't believe this is real, she murmured. It can't be. I can't be sitting on your kitchen floor surrounded by imps. You can't be real. Aidan frowned at her, pursing his lips. Will you stop questioning my existence? I don't question yours, he snapped. I'm not a figment of the imagination. You could be, you don't know. Besides, I asked you to the cinema. A figment of the imagination wouldn't do that. He paused. Well, it might if you weren't well, but I'm real. Other people have seen me. Mrs. Harding is in here every day. Oh no, Mrs. Harding. She saw all that. Aidan held up a hand. I'll sort it. Don't worry. She glared at him. You won't hurt her? He pursed his lips. Of course I won't. Kate, I've been here for 5 years. I haven't hurt anyone while I've been in this village. I am a fully fledged, engaged member of the community. I go to the quiz night at the pub and the Christmas fete. I go carolling and litter picking. I am not a threat, despite my previous occupation. Kate narrowed her eyes. She wasn't convinced. So I guess the next date is cancelled then, he said. Of course it is, she snapped. I'm a Christian vicar and you're a pagan god, apparently. Conflict of interest doesn't cover it. She covered her face. Am I going to lose my job? I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think your God works like that. Forgiveness is his whole deal, really. I need a cuppa. Do you want one? Without waiting for her to answer, he got to his feet and went into the cafe. It was an utter mess, but at least the kettle was still working. He went to the front door and locked it before anyone came in. He took his time making 2 cups of sweet tea. Kate would probably be gone by the time he took it back. Are you really going to leave? Kate asked, appearing beside him, making him jump. Yeah, there's people I care about here. I'll tidy up and then be gone by tonight. It won't take Gwyn and Aaron long to recover, he said, giving her a cup. What are you going to do with all the cakes and stuff? I'm sure the homeless shelter won't say no. They stood behind the counter, drinking tea and surveying the wreckage of the cafe. All of his precious dishes sat smashed on the floor, the shards sparkling in the sunlight under the wreckage of the dresser. Other than that, and the one patch of damaged plaster where the wall had been hit by the whip, there wasn't a huge amount of stuff to tidy. He didn't have much to pack in the flat upstairs either. A few hours and it'd be like he'd never been here. There was quite a lot of stock, but the shelter could have all that as well. It would just go to waste otherwise. Kate's phone went off, its shrill tone like a scream in the silent shop. She jumped and nearly dropped her mug. She fumbled in her pocket to find it and sighed. It's the bishop. I have to go. Sorry, Aidan. She took a few moments to gather up her things and tidy her appearance. She made her way to the door and hesitated. She smiled sadly at him. Bye, Aidan. All the best. Thanks. He closed his eyes as the door shut and sank to the floor. Stupid Aaron, stupid Gwyn, stupid Ave. Why did he need to go home? Why did it matter if he was a baker these days? No one believed in them any more anyway. Whose faith would be shaken if they knew Aid, son of Lear, made eclairs? An imp sat beside him and nudged him. Master, the women, they are a problem, it said slowly, its voice dark and rasping. He sighed. I know. Fix it. The imp grinned, its teeth sharp and glistening. Understood. It darted off towards the door, and Aidan realised that he'd accidentally sent it off on a murder mission. Don't kill them, he said quickly. Make them forget what they saw today. The imp paused at the door and narrowed its eyes at him. Then it clucked its tongue, as if displeased. What is the point, it complained, of being the servant of a god of war, if I do not get to kill anything? Aidan glared at it. Talk back to me again, and I will bake you into a pie, and keep you alive the whole time while you cook, and while your brethren eat you. The imp grinned again, as if pleased by its master's threat, and vanished. Aidan shook his head and looked at the other imps, who were waiting expectantly for orders. Tidy up. He went to his office as the imps took care of the mess. He needed to ensure all the loose ends were tied up. Other small businesses shouldn't be left short just because he had to move on. Plus, it would keep his mind off of Kate. By the time his imp was done, she'd never remember what she'd seen or who he really was. But he'd never forget the look on her face when he told her what he was. Within an hour, they were done. All his bills were paid, the cafe stock packed away, his few belongings in the boot of his car. He just had to drop the keys to the building to the letting agent, along with the rest of the year's rent, and they could go. He picked up his recipe book, the one he'd written by hand, and sighed. This wasn't fair. He liked it here. He'd made a home here. But it wasn't fair to stay. Aran and Gwyn would never give up, and that meant all kinds of hell for the people of the village. There was a knock at the door, and the imp he'd sent after Kate and Mrs. Harding bowed. It is done. Good. Gather the others. His phone pinged and he checked it, his stomach in knots. It was from Kate. Hi, I never grabbed that recipe off you. Can I have it? It would really help me out. Kay, kiss kiss. The imp had done its job well. He rubbed the back of his neck. This was the problem when you stayed somewhere too long. You built relationships. You couldn't just vanish. He opened the recipe book and snapped a few pictures of the sticky toffee pudding recipe, attaching them as his reply. His phone went off again. You star. We still on for Friday? K. 3 kisses. He groaned and stamped his foot. This really wasn't fair. He really liked Kate. Liked her enough to give her his secret sticky toffee recipe. Even the imps who helped him in the kitchen didn't know that this was his special recipe. Sorry, I have to leave. Pretty major family stuff has come up. I really like you, Kate. Really like you. But I don't think I'll be back. I'm sorry. And then he turned off the phone. The imps chittered at his feet, a few rubbing against his ankles like peculiar cats. Come on, he said. Let's go. Where? They asked in unison. Aidan thought about it for a moment. He needed space and time. It had taken them 5 years to find him in Yorkshire. Where could he hide where it might take them longer to find him? He smiled. Sicily. I've always fancied learning how to make cannoli.